Meanwhile, NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels to discuss stepping up the bombing campaign in Libya. In the last hour, NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has been giving an update on the military campaign.
The operation has been running for just over 2 months, and I can tell you that everyone at the table agreed we have made clear progress. If you look at the situation in Libya now and compare it with the situation when Operation Unified Protector began, it is clear how much NATO and partners have achieved.
Well, pictures of Muammar Gaddafi had been broadcast on Libyan state television. They were shown just hours after a massive NATO assault on Tripoli. They appeared to show the Libyan leader holding an official meeting. There's no way to independently verify the pictures. Al Jazeera's Cal Perry is monitoring the latest developments in Benghazi, from where he sent us this report.
Day turned to night in the Libyan capital, and the vicious bombardment continued. NATO stayed the course into the early hours of Wednesday morning, repeatedly striking Gaddafi's compound. By nightfall, the leader's only response was a ranting, defiant message carried by state television, audio only.
O youth of Libya, I know you are strong. Stay strong. Come to my compound in Bab al-Aziziyah to protect me and my family.
Those few still loyal to Gaddafi lashed out at the international community.
We are getting to the figure 1,000 casualties. Up to the 26th of May, so from the 19th of March to the 26th of May, 718 people were killed in the NATO attacks around Libya.
There's no way to verify the government figures, as NATO has greatly damaged the government's command and control structure. While diplomatic representatives from NATO nations continue to come to Benghazi to pledge both economic and political support, most people's eyes are on the military front. Rebels are only 100 kilometers from Tripoli for the first time, with Gaddafi in their sights. Cal Perry, Al Jazeera, Benghazi.
Well, to discuss the possibility of stepping up the military campaign, we're joined by Jock Stirrup. He's a former head of the British Armed Forces and served in the Royal Air Force during campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. Lord Stirrup, NATO has moved from nighttime bombing to using low-flying jets to bomb Libyan targets in broad daylight. Why the change in tactics? What's behind this move?
Well, I think that the tactics are always designed to try and lead one towards the strategic objective. And the objective here, quite clearly, is the removal of Gaddafi and his regime. I don't think that Gaddafi himself is ever going to be persuaded of that, but those who support him, those who sustain him in power, might be. And therefore, in my view, the campaign is targeted at those particular people, at convincing them that their future and their self-interest lies in a Libya that is not run by Colonel Gaddafi.
Officially, there are no special forces on the ground, so where's the intelligence coming from that's allocating these daily targets to NATO's planes?
Well, I do not know the answer to that, and if I did know it, I certainly wouldn't tell you. But all I will say is that the intelligence that goes into this sort of targeting is very carefully assembled and analysed from a multiplicity of sources. And I think, as we have seen, the attacks that have been delivered by NATO against the Gaddafi regime have been very precise, very carefully targeted, and have really bent over backwards to avoid collateral damage and injury to civilians. And it's interesting to hear those casualty figures being quoted. As far as I'm able to see, no international journalists have ever been shown any convincing evidence that there have been anything like those kinds of civilian casualties inflicted.
Yesterday was the biggest air operation yet against Gaddafi's forces. Is the tactic now, do you think, to increase the air operations, to turn the screws on Gaddafi's regime militarily?
I think that must be part of it. What you're trying to do here is to remove the support from Gaddafi so that he is isolated and cannot be sustained in power. To do that, you've got to analyse what the motivations are of those who do support Gaddafi. Now, that is a very complex intelligence issue as well, which I'm sure is going on. That then leads you to certain conclusions about what targets you should attack. But the object of the exercise is not just to destroy Libyan military equipment or Libyan command and control, but to have an impact on the minds of those who are helping to sustain Gaddafi in power and to help them change their minds.
How is all this increased air power going to leverage a political solution, Lord Stirrup? Because it hasn't yet forced Gaddafi to the negotiating table.
No, and I don't think it ever will force Gaddafi to the negotiating table. As I say, I think that the people that you've got to influence are those who support Gaddafi. If Gaddafi has no support whatsoever, then he cannot stay in power. I mean, it's just simply impossible. So it's not Gaddafi you're trying to convince, it's those who have an interest in supporting them, and it's convincing them that actually their interest is in stopping that support. That really is the key to all of this. And as ever, you've got to look at it from both sides. You've got the carrot and you've got the stick. There have got to be some political possibilities for those people, for a new Libya, but at the same time they're not going to even think about those political possibilities unless they feel the pressure on themselves and on the regime that is the consequence of this military activity.
Lord Stirrup, let me get a final thought from you, if I may. NATO defence ministers are meeting in Brussels to review the results of the air campaign over the last 2 months or so. What's your assessment of the operation so far?
Well, my assessment of the operation is that it's gone pretty much as I would have expected. There was never going to be any quick military victory in this sort of campaign, and indeed the only successful outcome is going to be a political outcome, one that is actually leveraged by the military campaign. So as is so often is the case, the military campaign is a means to a political end and not an end in itself. And if you are trying to coerce people, if you're trying to persuade them to change their mind about the regime, that is going to take time, there's no doubt about it. But the longer that this goes on and the longer that it's clear that Gaddafi cannot run Libya, that he cannot exercise governance, that it is impossible for Libya to have any future with Gaddafi, then I think the more you're going to see people defecting from the Gaddafi regime, as we have seen in relatively small numbers up to now.
Lord Jock Stirrup, thank you for talking to Al Jazeera.
Thank you.